All right. Well, we are back with another episode here. If you don't know me, I am Kai Van Leuven. I spent over 30 years in the Mormon church, and this is what I did after leaving the church.
And I'm Di Beals. I'm a pastor at Venture Church, and this is Jesus for Mormons.
There we go. All right.
Glad we're back.
Yeah, it's really good. I'm excited to be back. And we're going to be talking about kind of a heavier subject today. I always like to...
Feels like a theme.
No, we're in this very beginning.
Yeah.
And I am somebody that loves to rejoice. I'm somebody that loves to be happy. And I literally spend most of my life messing around, like just laughing and telling jokes. My wife talks to my 10-year-old son, and she's like, not everything is a joke. Like and I'm like, I wonder where he gets that from.
Life lessons in the Van Leuven household.
Like, not everything's a joke. But I do want to, on a serious note, I think that hearing about very heavy subjects has to do with capacity. So if you're somebody that's maybe going through a really hard time and you say, hey, I don't know if I have the capacity for kind of a harder subject, I may recommend skipping this or because it does deal with kind of some harder mental health things. And so I don't know how you feel about that, Di, but I
like the word capacity. Consider this the warning that real life truth is about to happen right here on this podcast.
Right here on this podcast. So normally we say go back and listen to the episodes. But
now we're saying go forward and
now
skip.
we're saying do what I wish I could have done and just skip all this kind of heavy stuff. But no, I do mean that though. I don't want this to add to anyone's burden of leaving the church or hard traumatic things. But I do think it's important because if I did skip it, which I kind of have maybe an inclination to avoid going back to hard things, I don't think it would really give perspective of what this journey looked like. So, all right. So this is called a valued life, past tense, valued life. So I'm going to start by talking, and I don't want this to come off of arrogant, but I do feel that I've been successful in my professional life. In my professional life, I've been able to grow a nice business that me and my wife together have grown. But from about 22 to 32, I could not be found anywhere. My one calling card, I am not a super intelligent person. I am not a super creative person, but I am a worker. I would say that's my calling card. I can work. And from those ages, from 22 to 32, I worked like a dog. I mean, I just worked. I had a daytime job, and then after that job, I would go work another full shift. I used to keep track of how many hours I had, and I didn't work Sunday, right? So I would work 80, 90 hours every week for 10 straight years. Wow. At one point when I was 22, my first project, I ripped out the kitchen of the house me and my wife were living in. We actually lived in one of the bedrooms. We had a microwave and a mini fridge, which you can do when you're 22.
Yeah.
And I remember eating dinner with my brother, and he had friends over, which my brother's very social and always has friends over. And they said, "Oh, tell me about what you do." And I said, "Oh, I remodel properties and I have rental properties." And they said, "Oh man, that sounds really like exciting." And before I could respond, my brother butt in and he says, "His job actually sucks.
No.
Like you'll never see that guy. He just ghosts all the time." And so that's really what my 20s were all about, was just working. And when I went through my faith crisis, so if we're going back to the story of meeting with my bishop, I had just bought a storage facility, which if you're an investor, I was kind of climbing the investment rungs,
Okay.
right? Kind of small commercial stuff. Um, I was about 80% done with a project right when I had my faith crisis. So I was really, really close to being done. And I was in the middle of that project I was at 80% done when I had this faith crisis. And I remember that night, it was like a Wednesday or a Thursday. I just drove home. I showed up at my house. My wife was like, "Why are you home? Like, what are you doing home?" Because she expected to see me Saturday night at like midnight so we could, wake up and go to church the next day. Right. I mean, that was her expectation. And I came home and I just said, "Oh, I don't know. I just decided to come home." And she said, "Okay, yeah, that's not true. Cause you've never done that, in over this whole decade, you've just been missing, just working the whole time." So, really the one positive attribute that I had throughout my whole life and throughout my whole working life was this work ethic. And that really during my faith crisis was just gone. Like after I went through the faith crisis, I remember my body always ached just from stress and just kind of just always feeling like mentally drained, physically drained, like not really having anything in the tank. I remember driving back down to my project and just saying, "Okay, well, let's just like work to kind of tune out all this garbage that you're dealing with. Like, let's just do what we always do. Crank the music up to 10, work, it will all kind of go away." And it just didn't happen. Like I couldn't get it out of
You're alone with your thoughts at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I tried to muffle that all out to try to kind of like blow this out of my system. And it just didn't work. Like it was kind of all consuming. I think going with this theme of grief, actually, I'm going to derail my subject a little bit. I listened to this podcast from Huberman who talked about grief, and they said that you're actually part of grief. Something I'm going really off script here. One thing with grief is that you actually start to pursue. Even though you can't obtain what you're trying to pursue, you are always like reaching for it and reaching for it and reaching for it. You're trying to restore.
Reaching for something you can't have.
Reaching for something you can't have. And that's kind of the hard. He talked about how the brain, and I'm so not doing this justice, but how the brain ties that to trying to grasp and reach for something, but it's not possible to obtain it. And so that's where my mind was. I was constantly kind of consuming all this church history stuff and really trying to wrestle with that. And it just wore me down and just beat me down. I remember showing up at a job site and being like, "Okay, Kai, all you have to do is just like grab a garbage bag and just fill it up with garbage. Like that's the only goal for today." And I just remember like how hard that was and how many breaks I would take and how I'd be like, "Oh, okay, I'll just run to the store and grab this," or, just trying to distract myself away. And so I felt like this one like supernatural blessing I had, which was work ethic, was just stripped from me, So it was during COVID. And we did what everyone else does. We bought an RV. I'm like, I'm not working anyways. We bought an RV, right? Come on. I'm sure that there are tens of thousands of people listening to this. If there are tens of thousands listening to this who are like, "Yeah, we thought about buying an RV or we bought an RV during COVID."
There was a shortage of RVs during COVID.
And I paid dearly for one of those RVs.
So, I hope it was worth it and it didn't need to be remodeled.
The first one did.
Okay.
The second
more than one.
Oh my gosh.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Okay. I'll tell you a secret. My wife, hopefully she didn't hear this part of it. I don't even like RVing.
Oh.
But I've been all over the country in an RV.
Okay.
So we decided, hey, we'll get an RV and we'll drive around and we'll get out as a family. My wife knew that I was had all this heavy junk I was dealing with. And so I think it was during our second time RV, second time going down the 101, right? So
Oh,
I
that's
don't know.
a rough RV trip.
You think so? I think it's
Right.
gorgeous.
Oh, it's beautiful, but you have to go like 7 miles an hour for large stretches.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
aren't stretches, they're all curves.
They're all curves, but it is beautiful.
Yeah.
I think the thing with RVing is if you are in a good state of mind, it's like, oh, this
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
great. We're loving this with my family. People
If
are
people
laughing.
are not watching this and they're only listening, they need to go onto YouTube and just watch your little happy dance you did in your seat right there.
Oh dear. Well, yeah, maybe that will get made into a really cringy meme or something. Or what are those? Yeah, GIF. I don't know. Yeah, something. So, anyways, people are happy and they're excited. I'll tell you, the opposite is true when you're really dealing with stuff that it's just you driving and you're alone with your thoughts and your family's kind of in the back, but they aren't bringing you as much joy. Maybe they're bringing a lot more of like, why are they just yelling all the time, right? I mean, when you're really dealing with stuff. And so I remember we were driving down the 101 and I just, I'd left the church. I told the bishop I was leaving. And I was kind of dealing with the church hurt. And then I told my family, and I was dealing with kind of the fallout of that. And I think it gets to be a little bit, I think the self-talk, the dialogue in your head can become very negative. And I think that's what I was really experiencing as we drove. It just became very, very negative. It's funny because I looked as I drove, I think you start to see life not as it is in that moment. I think you lose perspective of where life is, and you start to kind of look at everything else from a very negative lens. And
do you think that's because you've lost sort of like an anchor point? Like you're drifting or you're being tossed around because you've lost what you were anchored to for so long? The truth, something solid, what you built your life on.
Yeah, I think that there's that something you thought was a surefire reality.
Yeah.
Is like not true at all, right? And there's that. I think it makes you start to question reality.
Yeah.
You start to question, like, I've done these things in my life, but did I really do them? Or were they just how I want to view that? I remember thinking about my wrestling career, which is probably, I'm not a good athlete. Like, I'll just be honest with you. I'm not, which is kind of funny. My coaches would always be like, man, we wish you were as athletic as you look. Just not a good athlete.
But you have work ethic, and that's what wrestling is.
Yeah, but I was a dog. I could work pretty hard, but I was always kind of an underachiever. I was I really only put together about 3 good months, and that was really my wrestling career, was winning pretty much everything my senior year. Was like, but before that, I really wasn't that good. I remember driving down the Oregon coast and being like, Kai, I think that was luck. I don't think that was you. I think that was just a few good months. That's not really an accomplishment. And I was like, well, and investing, you just rode your dad's coattails. Your dad was already successful and you just did what, you start to really gaslight yourself. You start to really look not for the positive, but for the negative of like, oh yeah, you have a good wife and good kids, but you hooked your wife when she was 17 and, the kids come with it. You start to really like not speak life in yourself, start to speak some negative feelings and just so that was really what I was experiencing as I was driving and hitting every curve.
That's
just
tough right there.
Yeah, it's tough, and it's tough for a long period by yourself, just sitting there with the wheel and just driving. And I remember thinking to myself, I just don't think that this life has value. That because I've tried really hard for 30 some odd years, and I just don't think that there's value. Like I put in a lot of work and I just don't think it's worth it. Like I just don't think that the work is worth the benefits are worth the effort. And I remember thinking to myself, like, this is very futile. Like I don't really want to continue on this path. Like, because it's just too hard. Like it's just too hard to feel that you're not getting anywhere in life. And so I remember we're driving and I'm just like, you know what? We're on the Oregon coast. I pulled over, you know, the Oregon coast is beautiful. Just the cliffs. Like I think when they show pictures of like the California coast, I actually just think it's the Oregon coast. The Oregon coast is beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really pretty. I pulled over and I was just like, you know what? I think I want this. I think I want to move on from, and I've thought about carefully how I can say this. You know, my kids someday might watch this. I would say that I thought I was having a mental health crisis. I would say at that point, and I don't want to be vague for the sake of being vague. I just want to kind of throw that out there that I maybe wasn't thinking very clearly and maybe in the middle of a mental health crisis. So I remember standing out there by myself. I told Allison, just keep the kids in. I'm just going to get some fresh air. And of course, you can't keep kids back. So my kids fling open the door. Hey, Dad! You know, I get maybe 20 seconds, and then I kind of like snap back into kind of reality of like, oh, I have these kids, you know, and I have them, you know, at the end of the day, right? Like I have these children, right? And you know, I have a responsibility to them, right? And I think Allison would be fine. She's smart and creative and would figure it out. But you know, you just look, it kind of snaps you back. You know, you're in your own world for, you know, that drive and these months that are really crappy, kind of in your own head. You know, I wasn't alone in those times. You know, it was me with a crazy person. You know, it was me with somebody that just wasn't thinking correctly, right? But my kids came out, and I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, Kai, like this has kind of gone a little too far in my, you know, thinking, right?
Yeah.
Like as I took a picture of my kids there, got back in the car, and drove off, and then I stayed up that whole night, 24 hours after this experience, and just kind of like thought about it, like, okay, Kai, let's say your life does have no value. Like, let's say it's just at zero and things are going to be futile from here on out. Let's just say that that's a real, and I kind of, if you know the way I self-talk to myself.
You had to walk through your options.
Yeah, I walked through my options and I just said, okay, let's just say it is futile. Okay. Well, then what can you do like in life where you can at least leave something, where you can at least like give to something just throughout your whole life? And so it kind of led me to like, I think that was a negative experience. I wouldn't tell somebody to, you know, kind of have a mental health crisis. But at the same time, it was a little bit like the nihilism side of me kind of left, which is interesting. Like it was more like, well, how can I make something out of this, out of life, out of this moment? And so I think that's really what started to shift my mindset. Now that was not I associated religion with hurt. So that it wasn't religion.
Right.
It was totally something else. It was totally
let's make the best out of what's left or something.
Let's make the best out of what's left. Like let's just like let's double down on coaching. Like let's coach kids. Like let's invest in them and like let's see where that leads. Like let's I'll tell you what really did leave. I really stopped being so ambitious about my career. That's never come back. I've never felt like I want to keep growing my business. I've actually felt the opposite. How can I how can I not do this anymore? Like, how can I just focus on what's more important?
Yeah.
You know, those 90-hour weeks are not as common.
I'm happy to hear that.
uh, I mean, it was kind of fun, actually. I enjoy working, but it was I don't know. I just dialed that back. I just said, you know, I'm not going to do this the same way. I'm going to do it differently, because I want to, like. I feel like I'm kind of like puffing myself up here, but I do want to give back. Like, I want my life to have value to people around me.
Well, you reassessed your priorities and had to decide what's now my top priority when one of the top priorities is gone.
Yeah, when one of my yeah, exactly. And so I do want to talk about this one point of this. I'm preparing all of these. I'm rewriting this out before me and you are going to talk, right?
Yeah.
I'm rewriting out my stuff, you know, and it's early in the morning and I'm just like grinding it out, you know, and trying to kind of take notes. And I'm sitting there and my 6-year-old daughter walks in, right? I'm reading this. I'm reading these really like negative things, right? She can't read yet. Glory to God. She sits on my lap, right? And she says, "Dad, what are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just reading some things." And she's, "Well, what are you reading?" And I said, "Oh, nothing, sweetie. You know, I mean, you have a 6-year-old little girl, you know,
precious, sweet, innocent,
precious,
tender-hearted,
sweet, innocent, just sitting there." And I'm like, I mean, this is like, even with nothing else in my life, like this is everything.
Yep.
Right? Like, I don't know. And I think that's kind of like, things do get better.
Yeah.
And I think it's good to assess for people, like, after you go through something like this, like, what is the next step where you can see positive, where you can see growth, you know, in that. I do think that the ex-Mormon community can be a little bit negative, but if you look at the people who create content and you look at like why they do it, it's actually like very much to help people, which I think is I actually think that's kind of interesting. Like, me and them are not aligned in like what belief looks like afterwards, or if any belief is okay, but I can like respect the fact that these people are like trying to help people through this, you know, type of, you know, life crisis type stuff. And I, you know, I think in that way we're aligned and we have some commonality. That was a little sidebar. Sorry, Di, but
it was free.
Yeah, that one's free. Oh dear. So I think that this is, you know, I always ask Di kind of a one question. Maybe that's a segment of, I don't know. Yeah, we're gunslinging here. But Di, how would you counsel people who are grieving or in crisis? Like, and I'm sure this happens. I'm sure you deal with this. What would you say to those people? What kind of thoughts do you have on that?
Well, it's interesting that you had asked this question, because I think it was 2 episodes ago when we first broached the topic of grief.
Yeah.
You've gained some ground since then. I think your initial reaction to the word grief or the concept of grief, you weren't so kind to yourself. You more thought, why do I have to deal with grief? Could get over it.
Exactly.
And you've done some study even in the past couple of weeks and thought about it. And tell me what you discovered in your research of grief. How would you define it?
Well, I think it's just dealing with loss, just simply put. And I think that can be a little more versatile than I was allowing it to be. Because when I look at all of the things, like the 5 stages of grief, I experienced all of those. And I think that a hard thing about life is not necessarily like, like doing the steps. It's figuring out what you're doing.
Mm.
Right. And I just kind of like went around in circles and around in circles and not really like said, like, this is normal. This is natural. I always thought like, oh, I'm alone. This isn't normal. No one's ever experienced these feelings. And if they have, they are kind of nihilistic and negative, right? The people who experience those. And so I didn't really like say, this is normal. This is natural. Yes, this is, and even if you look at like faith crisis, grief is not like a top keyword or buzzword that comes in, which I hope is like, I hope for the people listening to this, that they really research like grief and what that means. And I hope that that's like, they're like, oh yeah, I experienced that. I experienced that.
Yeah,
I experienced
absolutely.
that. And that they can use that as a tool to try to improve their quality of life as they kind of navigate all this stuff.
And even, I agree, improving your quality of life and maybe less work and responsibility put on yourself and more grace put on yourself. There is a place to recognize, I don't know, I hate the phrase, this is normal, but like this is common experience to walk through these stages. And here's the thing, I'm not a therapist or a counselor. I do have a psychology degree from a long time ago that I use all the time just working with people. But I have worked with a lot of people I've walked beside. I love people. So I've walked beside people through some of the most difficult things I can watch a human have to endure. And I think we most often associate grief with the loss of life. So death.
Sure.
I think maybe second place would be divorce. That comes into play. But I think one of the things that I learned through COVID is that most of the world was grieving because we all lost so much freedom and our own choice and, entertainment and, even things that bring us pleasure or happiness. And there's just so much loss as well as death, that I think I looked at grief differently starting then. But a few things that I would say about grief, it does not have to be tied to death, and it does not, certainly that is primary suffering of grief. It does not have to be tied to the loss of a job or a divorce. It can be the loss of anything valuable to you. And in a religious construct that is valuable, that I'm talking to you, so was incredibly valuable to you, you had anchored yourself to, this is massive. Like your whole world just turned upside down. I think understanding the stages of grief is really important, but understanding that there is no prescriptive way to walk through grief. The steps do not have to happen in order. They do not happen linear. You don't cross from step 1 to step 2 and not return to step 1. It can be circular. It can feel meandering, and nobody's time frame is the same, and nobody's experience in each of those steps is the same. But understanding what those categories are helps you feel like, okay, I'm not a crazy person. There's not something wrong with me that I feel a little fatalistic, or I feel a lot fatalistic, or I feel so angry and I'm taking that anger out, not just on who caused me this pain, but everyone around me, or whatever it might be. I remember walking beside a dear friend who lost her husband very unexpectedly with 4 kids in the house. And I told her almost every day, and I spent a week at her house. The first week I stayed at her house. And then for the first year, I walked beside her almost every day. And almost every day I told her, no one tells you how to do this. There's no one only you can walk through this. I'm here to walk with you, or to be a support, or just to be quiet. But only you can walk through this, and nobody gets to tell you how to do that. There's no right and there's no wrong. The other thing that I told her regularly that I hope brings hope to someone listening is you might feel like you're on the road to recovery, quote unquote, like you're overcoming some of the excruciating, unbearable pain, and you're starting to heal, and then have a really bad day where it just all hits you again. And that doesn't mean you lost the ground. It doesn't mean that you start all over. It just means you had a really bad day. And I used to tell this friend of mine, today was a bad day, but tomorrow's a new day. Tomorrow you get to pick up and go again. And it helps to have other people in your life. She had 4 kids depending on her to figure out how to walk through that. And she had to help them walk through it. Just like you've had moments where you look at those babies and you go, I got to figure out how to walk through this. And that helps. That's actually, I think, a healthy, instigator of the initiative to keep going or the motivation to keep going. But I do think there's space to say, there's not something wrong with you if you struggle to get out of bed in the morning, or struggling with the motivation, or, it's hard to see past the grief or the loss or the loss of trust or whatever it is, and see that tomorrow's better. Tomorrow, quote unquote, in the future.
Sure.
How does that hit you?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think the idea of not being too hard on yourself is something that I think people going through this, should really, or who have gone through it, and maybe still they have days where they say, oh, I'm just, thinking back on some of these really negative thoughts. I would hope that they would say, well, tomorrow will get better. There's hope. Like, my whole idea with my daughter coming in is like, my life is 100% different than when I was driving that RV, right? It's just 100% different. And we're talking about 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah.
I wish I had that perspective back then. I would have just said, hey, just deal, just deal with it. Just work through it. Like, try to, not put it all on you, and not say, oh man, I'm being a wuss if I feel something. If I feel that I'm not dealing with this in the right way, whatever the right way is, right? There is no oh, this is the right A, B, C, D. Now you're done. Go live, a happy life. That's not really the way that it goes. So I wish I would have had that perspective. And I hope that the people who are listening have that perspective, or are open to thinking about.
Right. Well, I guess if I were to add one more thought that I'm rolling around in my head right now, you would, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but so correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you would say now, and you are saying now, man, I wish I could have seen then what a good space I'm in now. Or I could see then what all the blessings are now, or I could see then, how things have turned out good for me. And it is hard to see when you're in the moment. And I think anyone who's gone through a grieving process probably does look back and think, I wish I could have gone through that faster. Again, I will say again, there's no prescriptive timeline here. However, maybe someone listening is years into being stuck in a stage of grief, the anger stage, or wherever they might be, really even the dark depression. And I'm not discounting depression at all. I am not a mental health therapist. That's not my area of expertise. But I will just say, maybe someone needs to hear, here's a thought. At some point, we might have to make a choice. I have to move on. And so sometimes what I tell people when they're going through something really painful, and they feel like I'm struggling to move past it in a realistic amount of time. This is not something you do 2 weeks in, But, let's say you're a year, 2 or 3 years in, and you're still just in such a dark place. There might have to be almost a physical, I'm going to circle a date on my calendar and say, that's the day I choose to not let this define me anymore. That's the day I choose to, quote unquote, get over it. And that doesn't make everything go away, but it's like this mental decision. I'm going to choose to pick up my life and start living again. And then all the good things follow that choice. But there has to be the choice, because you really could just live in the wallowing for the whole rest of your life. And then it's so sad, all the things you miss.
Yeah. Di, this is a really good lead into our next episode.
Oh, good.
And Di has not, I'll let you guys look behind the curtain a little bit. Di has not seen what the episodes
I don't have the
are.
roadmap. I'm along for the ride.
But I love that. I love that there can be a way to move on. And even if that's, for me, I physically, purged, and maybe we're going to go over that in one of these. I don't know if it's the next one or the one after.
Can we call an episode "Have a Bonfire"?
How do you?
I don't know. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
There have been times I've had to move on from something really painful, and I just took everything that represented it out in my yard and I burned it. Like, this isn't holding me back anymore. Burn the ships. It's called Burn the Ships.
This is actually really funny. Do you know that's what I did?
Oh, you did. Okay. Spoiler.
I'm like, Di. Wow, way to steal my thunder.
Okay.
Anyways, but I thought you knew that.
No.
Oh, well, there you go. There's always interest. I always think I'm a spiritual person, so I think, oh, that's a God thing. But it's very interesting. So, but I do think that I think it's okay to be in there, and then maybe if you realize, I would call that being in a funk. If you're in like this, hey, I'm just not really breaking past this. I do think that, I think it's fun to experiment with different things. I think it's fun to experiment with, hey, I could get rid of all these things, or I could set some filters on my phone, or I could, do something, maybe social media is not good for me. Maybe ex-Mormon Reddit isn't good for me.
Yep.
For those of us in the ex-Mormon world, maybe the Mormon Stories podcast I need to take a break from.
Yep.
Maybe talking to that friend who is also very negative about the church or about this, scenario it might be good. Like, even though they're a great guy or a great gal, it might be good to just take a pause until you get in a good mental space.
Really practical advice.
Yeah. I think all those things might, hopefully those kind of hit home, and try it for a month and see if it helps. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that you can't ever go back to those things. You can go back to those friends. You can go back to those, you can go back to ex-Mormon Reddit and read the funny memes. You can go back to those things.
But you're in a different place when you go back to those people or things.
Yeah, but you're in a, okay, I'm healthy.
Yeah.
My mind is healthy. I can laugh at these things and not go back to a, oh, I hate the church so much and I'm so angry phase. Yeah. Anyways, that's my maybe 2 cents on that. But well, with that, Di, thank you for being here and us talking about this I think very important subject. I think mental health is super important for just the era that we live in, and the movement of information. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it doesn't lend itself for us to be kind to ourselves. Yep. Really. And so I appreciate you having this conversation. Next
time you drive down the Oregon coast, you'll enjoy it.
Next time I'll enjoy it. I'll be like, wow, these curves are so awesome. And yay, have a lot of fun.
Go Oregon coast.
Yeah, go Oregon coast, right? Man, we should be sponsored by the Oregon coast.
Yes.
So anyways, but yeah, I think that, because I'm in a different space now, and I hope, and that's my hope. That's my prayer. If you're religious and you're listening to this, even if you're not, like, I do hope that as time goes on, you'll be able to see that life is good. Yeah. That there are good and great things. Yep. Aside from all of the junk that we have to deal with, that there's good. So. Before
we sign off, do you want to tell people how they can reach you if they have thoughts or questions?
Yes. I personally would love if somebody reached out to me and said, Kai, I just thought this is great. I'm not trying to tell you how to write your emails, but and maybe told their story. You know, I think each one of us have a story. And you can reach me at Jesus4Mormons dot
At Gmail.
Oh my god.
At Gmail.
At gmail.com. I don't know. Maybe you can reach out to a scammer, and they all have my phone number. So, anyways, but yeah, until next time.
Till next time.